The flower market opened at dawn and ran until the palace bells rang noon. For those 2 hours in between, it was the most honest place in Dravenmoor, not because the merchants were honest people, but because they were selling things that died. You could not claim a tulip was rare if it was already wilting. You could not inflate the price of a lily that was 2 days from the compost pile. The flowers told the truth about themselves, and anyone willing to sell them had to be at least approximately honest about what they had. Alpha King Kael Draven had been coming to the market for 3 mornings without anyone recognizing him. He was wearing the coat of a common trader and the specific expression of a man with nowhere particular to be. He had been listening. He had heard about the war tax, which the Eastern merchants called the blood toll, and talked about in the particular tone of people who were angry, but not yet angry enough to do anything that would get them in trouble. He had heard about the pack border situations, which the northern vendors discussed in the shorthand of people who lived close enough to trouble to have developed an efficient vocabulary for it. 6 years ago, he had stood in a chamber that smelled of ash and been told that Amara was gone. He had believed it because the evidence was specific and the people presenting it were people he had trusted for years, and because grief, when it arrived with detail, felt like certainty. He had searched for a year. Riven had been wrong, or so he had been taught to conclude. The search routes had ended in ash. The ring that had been found in the burning chamber had been heavy with the kind of authenticity that only came from actual fire. He had stopped searching not because he stopped loving her, but because every direction he sent his attention in returned him to the same ending. He had believed them because they had made the lie fit the shape of his grief exactly. He had heard the name daughter of the Bloodmoon 3 times in as many mornings, always in a murmur, always from the corner of the mouth, always with the quick glance that said, "This is the kind of thing that people get visited for saying too loud." He was listening for exactly this. He did not yet know he was about to stop listening and start seeing. Captain Orlan ran the gate checkpoint at the palace's south entrance. He was not, technically, responsible for market enforcement. His presence, 3 mornings in a row at the edge of the flower stalls, was not technically his assignment. He was watching the red flowers. He had been watching the red flowers for 6 weeks, under instructions from the council elder who paid his secondary salary, with a description of what he was supposed to find. A red rose that didn't wilt. A child who sold one. He had not found either yet. He was looking very carefully. The girl was small. She had a basket on one arm, and the specific combination of focus and wariness that children developed when they were responsible for something important, and were old enough to understand that they were responsible for it. She was selling flowers near the south gate entrance, which was not technically permitted. Captain Orlan walked over. He said, selling was not permitted within 30 feet of the gate. He said it in the tone that implied the rule was not his preference but his obligation, which was the specific lie that men told when they enjoyed enforcing rules that hurt people. The girl argued that she was 32 feet away and had measured. Orlan reached for the basket. The basket tipped. Most of the flowers hit the cold stone of the market floor and did what flowers did when they hit cold stone. They collapsed into the specific defeat of cut stems that had lost the last of their structural integrity. The girl was on her hands and knees gathering them. They were already wilting, all of them except one. The red rose sat on the stone as though the stone was comfortable. Its petals had not moved. Its stem was not compromised. It looked exactly as it had when it was in the basket. The girl picked it up before anything else. She held it against her chest. She said, "Don't touch my mother's flower." Kael had stopped at the edge of the scene because his wolf had gone quiet in the way that happened before something important. He had learned to trust that quiet. He moved through the small crowd that had gathered and crouched down to the girl's level. He helped her retrieve the remaining flowers without being asked. She was watching him with dark eyes that were doing a rapid, thorough assessment. He put the last flower back in the basket. He looked at her face. He went very still. He had a specific knowledge of his own face, the way people did when they had spent time in front of mirrors before formal occasions, and had learned its angles for practical rather than vanity reasons. The girl's eyes were his, not similar, his. He said carefully, "May I see the rose?" She pulled it closer to her chest. She said, "My mother said not to let people she doesn't know touch it." He said, "Your mother is very wise." He said it simply. Then she looked at him in the way small children looked at adults who said something that landed differently than expected, and she held the rose out, not handing it to him, but not refusing either. Close enough that his hand came near the stem. The rose seal opened, not gently, like something that had been held closed for years and was done being held. It ran through the petals in lines of silver-red light that had no reasonable explanation in the physical world. It was the specific light of royal mark recognition, and it was very clear, and it was very certain. Inside Kael, Riven did not do what he did when he encountered a threat. He did not rise. He did not warn. He made a sound that was the wolf equivalent of the moment you remembered something you had thought was gone forever. And then, in the specific register that Kael had only ever heard in the oldest bond language, one word: daughter. Kael did not immediately announce himself. He did not immediately do anything except stand up and take a breath, and decide that the next 5 minutes were going to require him to function precisely. He asked the girl her name. She said, "Liora Rose." He asked where she lived. She said that was exactly the kind of thing her mother told her not to tell strangers. He said, "Your mother is very wise." He said it again, meaning it more the second time. He asked if he could help her carry the basket. She considered this for longer than he expected. She said, "You can carry the heavy side, but I'm watching you." He carried the heavy side. He was watching Orlan, who had retreated to the gate checkpoint, but had not stopped watching the rose. Orlan was not angry. Orlan did not look like a man who had failed to confiscate an unauthorized flower. He looked relieved. Orlan did not look angry when the rose glowed. He looked relieved, like a man who had finally found what he had been ordered to find. He was already reaching for the communication token at his belt. Kael filed this. He followed Liora through the market. She was buying herbs from a woman who gave her a price reduction that had the specific character of an unofficial arrangement. She was buying a small packet of fever medicine from an apothecary who asked after someone named Sarah without looking directly at her. In the market, Liora trusted only 2 adults, her mother and old Sarah, who knew how to make fever tea without asking questions. She was saving the medicine for someone who needed it. She was doing all of this with the efficiency of a child who had been managing logistics since she was old enough to count coins. She said, at one point, without looking at him, "My mother says real roses don't wilt just because someone forgets to water them." He said, "What does she mean by that?" She said, "She means things that are real don't need permission to stay real." He held that. He was still holding it when Liora stopped before a gate, in a wall he had not noticed before, in a part of the city that had been reclassified as residential storage 20 years ago and had not been visited officially since. She looked at him. She said, "You can wait here." He said, "I would rather not." She considered him again. She went inside. 3 minutes later, the gate opened from the inside. Amara was holding a flower knife the way a person held a tool they had decided could also serve as a weapon. She was thinner than 6 years ago. She was looking at him with an expression that had layers. The outermost one was guarded. The next one was something he could not read. And under everything else was the specific face of a person who had been keeping a very large secret for a very long time and was now in the presence of the person the secret was kept from. She said, "You lost me because you trusted them. I kept our daughter alive because I stopped trusting anyone but myself." She said it clearly. She was not angry. She was stating arithmetic. The greenhouse was not large. It had been built as an auxiliary storage facility for a wine merchant. who had moved operations to the Eastern District 15 years ago and had simply not gotten around to demolishing it. The warmth came from the heating pipe in the wall and from the density of growing things, which held their heat in the way that communities held their warmth, by being close enough together to share it. Amara had made it into something. Not comfortable in the way that palaces were comfortable, but real in the way that places were real when they had been lived in by people who needed them to be real. There were drawings on one wall that were the specific kind of drawing that 6-year-olds made when they had been given chalk and a surface and told the surface belonged to them. There was a worn spot on the floor near the heating pipe where Liora sat when she was doing her lessons. There was a small pot of the only red rose that ever stayed red in this part of the city, growing in the best light near the window. The greenhouse was not large. It was enough. Midwife Sarah was in the corner near the warmest part of the wall, which was where the heating pipe ran. She had the look of someone who had arranged for this moment to be possible and was now staying out of the way. She had a document in her lap that she had been keeping for 6 years. Liora was watching from behind her mother. Amara said he had 2 minutes to explain why he thought he deserved more than 2 minutes. He said he did not think he deserved anything. He said that was the problem. He said, I trusted them. I knew the search was going wrong. I knew Riven didn't believe the conclusion. I let them write the end of the story anyway. He said, Blood told me she was mine. It did not make me worthy of her trust. Amara was quiet for a moment. She said, The ash. He said he had not understood what Bloodmoon ash did to a bond until recently. Sarah spoke from the corner. She explained simply. Bloodmoon ash was a compound that disrupted the scent bond between bonded wolves. It was not permanent, but it was long-lasting. When Riven tracked Amara's scent, every trail had been marked with burnt rose seal, a false closure, a dead end, a message that said the source of the scent was gone. Varric had not convinced Kael to stop loving Amara. He had only taught every trail to end in ash. Sarah produced the document. It was a birth record. Half of one. The other half had been removed from the royal archive, which she had not had access to, but she had kept her copy. It recorded Liora's birth under a blood moon. It recorded Amara's name. It left a blank where the father's name had been intended to go, because the page had been extracted before completion. Amara produced a ring. It was simple, plain, and had the specific worn quality of something that had been on someone's hand for years. Kael looked at it. He looked at the ring he had been given 6 years ago by Varric's council representative as proof of what had happened. The 2 rings were not the same ring, he said. The one they gave me was heavier. Amara said, yes. They made it from the wall fitting of the queen's chamber. They wanted it to look like fire had changed something. He understood the architecture of it now, the false rebellion, the burning chamber, the ring designed to look like what grief had done to gold. The guard who had been assigned to keep Amara safe and had chosen to actually do it. The search teams who had been redirected. The scent trails that all ended in ash. Sarah told him the rest. The prophecy had a last line. Varric's copy did not include it. The last line said, if the daughter is loved freely and not used, she may close what war seeks to open. The war gate was the old blood road between packs, sealed after the last Bloodmoon War. If opened by a royal child, every pack oath would wake as a call to arms. Varric had never wanted the child dead. A dead key opened nothing. He wanted her hidden until the gate was ready to obey. He had been watching for 6 years for the royal rose seal to complete its cycle. Liora's 6th blood moon had just passed. The rose was in full resonance. Orlan's message was already moving toward Varric. Kael saw Orlan's men at the edge of the residential quarter before Amara did. He said, they know. Amara said she had a route. He said he was not going to let her take it alone this time. She looked at him. She said, this is not last time. He said, no, it is not. They moved together. Liora moved with them because she was a child who had been moving with her mother through tight situations since she could walk. It was not going to not stop. Now, they were stopped at the palace north gate by Varric himself, who had come with enough council guard to make the statement he intended. Varric said, "The daughter of the Bloodmoon was a ward of the council under the Succession Stability Clause." He said it in the pleasant, procedural tone of someone who had been rehearsing it. Amara said, "Don't call it protection if you only mean to change whose hands hold the chain." Varric said, "A kingdom at peace asked questions?" He said, "A kingdom at war obeyed." He said, this was not a difficult choice for anyone who understood what stability meant. Kael had removed his disguise coat somewhere in the last 10 minutes. He was not sure exactly when. He had been thinking about something Riven had done when the rose seal opened in the market. He had been thinking about the fact that his wolf had not been uncertain. Riven had not said daughter as a question. He had said it the way you said the name of something you had been looking for when you found it in the last place you thought to check. Kael had spent 6 years learning not to listen to Riven on this particular subject, because every time he listened, the trail ended in ash, and the grief had to be managed again from the beginning. He was done managing grief. He was done letting the management of grief substitute for the actual work. He was standing at the north gate of a palace that had, for 6 years, housed a lie he had been close enough to touch if he had been willing to push past the comfortable explanation. He was standing in the coat of a market trader, without a crown and without a guard formation. He had a daughter. He had a queen. He had 6 years of wrong choices to account for. He could account for them. That was the first honest thought he had had about any of this. By then, the disguise was only fabric. Everyone who mattered had already seen the king beneath it. He was standing at the north gate of his own palace in the clothes of a market trader, without a crown, without a guard formation, with his wolf louder than he had been in 6 years. He said, "Take the girl." Amara said, "Kael." He said it to the council guard. He was not telling them to take Liora. He was watching to see if they would. 2 of the guard moved toward Liora. Riven appeared, not physically, but in the way he had appeared in the music room, in the way he appeared at the edge of formal authority when he was done tolerating the formal authority's decisions. The 2 guards stopped. The 3rd did not. The 3rd reached for Liora's arm. Liora pulled her arm away with the efficiency of someone who had been practicing this since she was 3 and said, "You don't have permission." She said it the way her mother said things. She looked at Varric. She said, "You want my flower. You have to go through me to get it." Varric reached for the rose. She held it. He was a Lord Elder of the Council, and she was 6 years old, and she did not let go. She said, "You don't understand what you're going to do with it." He said he understood exactly what he was going to do with it. She said, "You're going to open a door, and people will die." He said, "People die in peace too, just quietly, just where the crown doesn't see." She looked at him with eyes that were Kael's, in a face that had Amara's specific quality of directness. She said, "Then maybe the crown should look better." Varric took the rose. He brought it to the great hall himself. He walked through the court with a child's flower and the confidence of a man who had planned this for 6 years, and found the patience for it by reminding himself that some things only worked at the right moment. The moment was now. He was right about that. He was wrong about who would be in control of it. Kael came through the main entrance. Amara came through the side entrance she had used the last time she was here, before the false rebellion, before the burning chamber, before 6 years in a greenhouse keeping their daughter alive. She did not look like someone returning from the dead. She looked like someone returning from a place she had been forced to go. Varric placed the rose on the Bloodmoon crown. He said the words of the opening invocation. The crown did not respond. He said them again. Nothing. He said them a 3rd time, adding the supplementary clauses about blood right and succession. The rose sat on the crown and did what flowers did when they were held in the wrong hands. It waited. Liora walked through the hall. No one had stopped her because no one had been asked to stop her. And sometimes, the reason children moved through adult spaces unimpeded was that adults were so focused on the adults in the room that they forgot to track the children. She climbed the 2 steps to the crown platform. The court went quiet in the specific way. It went quiet when something was happening that no one had planned for, and that everyone could see the consequences of, but could not yet agree on whether those consequences were good or bad. She was 6 years old, and she was on the Bloodmoon crown platform. She had been in that market every morning for 2 years. She had been told the palace was the place where her mother's sadness lived. She was standing in the middle of it now, with a rose her mother had grown, and a question she had decided to ask in the only language the crown apparently understood. She picked up the rose. She held it for a moment. She looked at Kael, who was on one side. She looked at Amara, who was on the other. She placed the rose on the crown herself. She said, "I'm not opening a door for war. I want my mother to come home." The crown answered her, not with the sound of doors opening, with the sound of records being required to speak. The crown did not invent the truth. It forced every hidden record to answer the child it had been written to use. The false rebellion order, in Varick's handwriting. The Bloodmoon Ash requisition, through the council's supply chain. The search route redirections, with the dates and the names of the officers who had received the instructions. The prophecy, full text, including the last line. The sealed order that Orlan had been carrying, Red Rose Watch, authorized by the Elder Council, signed by Varick. All of it appeared on the walls of the Great Hall in the moonwriting that the crown used when it had something to say that was larger than what anyone had asked it to say. Varick said this was being done by a child who did not understand what she was doing. Liora said, "I understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm letting the truth answer for itself." She said it in a voice that was 6 years old and certain, in the way that certainty was when it had been held by someone who had been told the truth from the beginning. The rose bloomed on the crown, not the sealed bloom of a royal mark, full, open, the way flowers bloomed when they were given what they needed. The war gate did not open. The blessing moved through the old blood road instead, and it did not wake the pack oaths as a call to arms. It woke them as a call home. Varick's next sentence was about procedural authority. It was a good sense about procedural authority. He had prepared it in advance because he had learned, over 40 years of council work, that when things went wrong, the only shelter was procedure, and that procedure, described correctly and with sufficient confidence, could cover over almost anything. The walls of the Great Hall were still covered in moonwriting. The moonwriting included a document in his handwriting. The court was reading it. The court was reading the document in his handwriting, on the walls of the Great Hall, in front of the Alpha, King, and the Queen they had been told was dead, and the 6-year-old who had just placed a rose on the crown. And the moonwriting was not going anywhere, because it was the crown's own language, and the crown had decided the record needed to be visible until the people in the room had finished understanding it. Varick said his next sentence about procedural authority. No one was listening to it. Varick was arrested before he finished it. Orlan, who had watched the hall fill with evidence of instructions he had been following, said the sealed order was genuine, and he was willing to testify. He said it in the specific voice of someone who had decided that the ledger of his choices had one entry that he could still make go a different direction. Kael said the false rebellion record would be opened. He said this in the Great Hall, before the court, standing without a throne between him and the people he was speaking to. He said Amara had not died in a burning chamber. He said she had protected the heir of Dravenmore for 6 years, while the palace stood and watched the wrong evidence. He said, "Blood told me she was mine. It did not make me worthy of her trust. I am going to spend the time I have left on this throne being worthy of it, instead of assuming I already am." Amara said, from beside him, "Half this throne was always mine. I am returning to the half that belongs to me." She said it to the court, not to Kael, to the court that had watched her title burned with a false chamber. Kael said he would not ask Liora to take any role or title until she was old enough to choose. Liora said, "I already chose. I chose to come home." She said it simply. not with the relief of a child who had been afraid and was now safe, with the satisfaction of a child who had done the thing she came here to do. She was 6 years old, and she had placed a flower on a crown and told it she wanted her mother to come home. This was, for her, a complete and satisfying resolution. The court did not completely agree. For once, the court had not been asked. Midwife Sarah's record was entered into the archive. Amara's ring was returned to the official royal record. The council elder seats connected to Varric were reviewed. The Bloodmoon ash supply chain was investigated. The pack border oaths were reviewed for false additions. The red rose prohibition was lifted. In a greenhouse that would soon no longer need to be hidden, a small potted rose was carried to the palace garden by a girl who wanted her plant to have more light. The city had seen a flower seller girl fall in the dust before the palace gates, but when her red rose touched the Bloodmoon crown, the kingdom learned she was never a market child to be chased away. She was the daughter who closed the gate of war, and the family the throne had failed to protect finally came home on their own terms, with the truth arriving first and making space for them. In the palace garden, the red rose grew. It did not wilt. It had never needed permission to stay real.